So, one of the things that you mentioned that you wanted to talk about was the idea that Jim Morrison might have been somehow involved in MK Ultra, which is a fascinating, part of history in general. We could go down a long rabbit hole just talking about the history there. This is one of my topics of interest for sure, as I think a lot of my listeners as well. So I'm curious, could you provide a little bit of context about what kind of stories surround that relationship and what your thoughts are about that?
Yeah, it's a very important question because I'm getting like so many comments and emails and stuff in relation to another book by a man, last name McGowan, I don't know the first name, called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which goes into I'm not an expert on and I know about MK Ultra, but I'm not as deep into it as a lot of people are, but I can speak intelligently to an extent with Jim Morrison. So MK Ultra was, as we all know, was this program that was exposed in the 70s that was trying to experiment with how to create, mind-controlled assets of the government in all these different various ways, through like, creating, I think it was mostly based on traumatizing individuals to be able to get into their minds and take advantage of something called dissociation.
Yeah, there was this notion that you could create something called psychic driving, and there were some pretty fucked up experiments carried out along these lines on American citizens without their consent by our government. So yes, this was something that went on for quite a while, and has a very rich and fascinating history that people can look into. There's a couple of documentaries about it and several podcasts and all kinds of stuff, but okay.
While psychic driving, that's a new phrase that's frightening.
Yeah, it's very dark and fucked up once you look into it for sure.
So this is really cool. There's a part of Los Angeles where I like to, go have coffee and stuff. And I made a friend. He said, I work out with this guy, his name is Tom, and he wrote this really great book that's popular in the culture right now called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 1960s. And I didn't know about this book at all. And he wanted us to meet. And then I got a curiosity. I got online and saw that, he was on like Joe Rogan getting interviewed about his book. And I was like, wow, this guy's got like 4 or 5 million views here. And I read his book, and I think Tom O'Neill has probably like the most mature, most responsible understanding of how to approach the subject of MK Ultra and what he found out about Charles Manson and the trial, surrounding the Tate LaBianca murders. So one night I was in Hollywood and I was taking the bus back home because I don't have a car right now. At the time, I didn't have a car, and I was at a bus stop and there was one person there by themselves, and I kept looking at them like, I kind of think that's Tom O'Neill. And I went up to him and said, are you Tom? And he's like, yeah. And so that, that's how we ended up meeting. And then we agreed that, like our meeting was meant to be. And he told me that he also gets a lot of questions about McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Gold Mine. And just for the viewers, this book is popular with a lot of people who are into 60s music because I read the book and I think it's a flimsy argument. There's a lot of guilt by association kind of things going on here, but there's no real evidence. There's no real line of proving anything about how singer-songwriters living at the Laurel Canyon were colluding with the United States government with their artwork to somehow mind control their audiences to do things or whatever that they wanted to do. Like there's just no fire there. It's just a lot of smoke that kind of makes it interesting and suspicious. But Jim Morrison was absolutely not an MK Ultra, mind controlled, asset placed in the music industry, by the American military establishment. The
I'm
book
not sure
talks.
that anybody was that, Paul. I'm not sure
Yeah.
that anybody was, but
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know.
So it's like, but a lot of people, they just sort of think this because of this book, and I'm rather surprised by all of this. So Tom's book goes into Charles Manson having been he was in prison for about 7 years in federal prison in the 60s, and that he made a lot of his handlers in prison, like his counselors and people like that, they turned out to be people who were in the CIA who were involved in all of the things that were going on with MK Ultra when a lot of those documents were released in the 70s, all these individuals. And that when Charles Manson was released and he was in San Francisco going to these clinics and all that, like his counselors and his parole officers and all of them, they were also people who were once in the CIA involved connected with all this MK Ultra stuff. And they were the ones who approved him when he asked to go down to Los Angeles because he wanted to get into the music industry. A lot of people don't know that, Neil Young tried to get Charles Manson signed to his record label. He
Mm.
thought like Charles Manson was like, was really talented, had something to offer.
There was a member of the Beach Boys who was kind of loosely associated with his kind of crew for a little while too, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yes. Yes. There was I think Charles Manson was living in someone's house and it was owned by someone in the Beach Boys.
Okay.
And something went on. Charles Manson was arrested and then, mysteriously he was released. He wasn't put back in prison to violate his because he violated his parole. When Tom put in all these FOIA requests, the two times that Charles Manson was arrested and released, he should have been put back into prison. But it turns out there was other arrests that we don't know about in which, he absolutely should have been put back in prison, but was just mysteriously just let go.
Mm.
So but Tom makes the very like responsible, point that all of these things they point to something that is quite possible, but we just don't really know.
Sure. I mean, I don't think it's like outside of the realm of possibilities for, you've got this group of people who are interested in investigating mind control tactics, right?
Mhm.
Having somebody who is, doing this cult experiment or whatever we want to call it, that seems like something that they might have been interested in watching. Whether or not the people knew that they were involved with it, because I think a lot of times when we look at the MK Ultra stuff, and I'm sure other things as well, but a lot of the people that were like involved with it didn't know that that's what they were involved with because there were so many different like shells and other names and things around it too. So it's kind of like hard to trace down, and it's possible that we may never like be able to know. But I could see that being within the realm of possibilities, just in terms of like what would make sense.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you completely. Like, we're going to continue, to find out as the years go on, more and more, get to like, this truth. It's like this onion that we keep peeling about all this. It's really fascinating.